Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the footnotes of history, those stories hidden in the margins, and reveal that they were often actually the main drivers of world-changing events.
And today we are digging deep into a conflict fought not really with tanks or battleships, but more against pressure gradients and cloud formations. We're exploring this high-stakes, really secretive struggle known as the Secret Weather War of the Second Great War.
Okay, let's unpack this right away because it's easy to forget just how much history is utterly defined by meteorology. Our sources give some great historical context here.
Oh, definitely.
Think back centuries. Kublai Khan's massive invasion fleet heading for Japan wiped out. Not by the Japanese, but by a typhoon. The divine wind, they called it.
Exactly. Or, Napoleon in Russia. His army wasn't just beaten by the cold, that was obviously huge. First, it was decimated by the sweltering heat that summer, caused incredible supply problems, health issues.
Right, and then the famous frigid winter finished the job.
And even Waterloo, those torrential rains, turning the battlefield into a muddy quagmire. That played a vital role, maybe unglamorous, but vital, in his final defeat.
But the 20th century, well, that just amplified the risk hugely. Suddenly, it wasn't just infantry slogging through mud. You had modern, complex machines, aircraft, fast ships, tanks. Accurate weather prediction became absolutely critical.
Yeah, think about it. A high-value bombing run, grounded if icing was predicted.
Or your target is just socked in by fog. Useless.
And those vital transatlantic convoys, slow-moving targets, they desperately needed reliable forecasts, maybe 72 hours out, just to avoid the worst North Atlantic storms.
Without that data, you simply couldn't launch major operations safely. The stakes were immediate, huge risk of catastrophic failure.
But you have to remember the tech back then in the 1940s. They had nothing like satellite imagery, not even high-altitude observations, really.
Right. Meteorologists were relying on traditional tools, barometers, weather balloons, basic stuff.
Which meant they could only manage reliable predictions, the kind you could actually base an operation on, maybe 72 hours out. At best.
That 3-day window, that's the whole game, isn't it?
Absolutely. The side with the best real-time, up-to-the-minute data could potentially dictate the pace and timing of the whole conflict.
And that brings us right to the core mission of this deep dive. We're tracing this high-stakes game of cat and mouse, Germany versus the Allies, trying to gather this critical data and specifically focusing on the Arctic regions.
Right. Why the Arctic?
Yeah.
Because that's the birthplace, essentially, of the massive low-pressure systems that define European weather.
So whoever controls the Arctic's forecasts, well, they control the operational window for the Atlantic and Western Europe. Which leads us straight into part one, Germany's geographic dilemma. In their early, sometimes pretty desperate attempts to find a workaround, you'd think, controlling most of continental Europe by 1940, they'd have all the weather data they needed, but no.
No, they had this fundamental geographic problem. It's all down to global circulation patterns.
The jet stream, basically.
Well, the general flow. European weather systems form, they evolve, and then they move predominantly west to east. So, to predict the weather over Berlin or London in 48 hours.
You needed observation posts way out west.
And north. Exactly. Places like Greenland, Jan Mayen Island, the Svalbard archipelago, which includes Spitsbergen, critical locations.
And crucially, these weren't German territories. They belonged to Denmark and Norway, both neutral at the start of the war.
And ironically, for the first few months, that neutrality actually helps Germany. Stations in Greenland, Jan Mayen, they followed international protocols. They transmitted data in plain international code.
Which the German Navy just listened in on.
They just intercepted it and used it. Simple as that. But that fragile setup completely shattered on April 9th, 1940.
Hitler's invasion of Denmark and Norway?
Right. Tactically, it secured Norway's long coastline, which was important. But for the weather war, it was a profound strategic blunder. Because the Danes and Norwegians overseas, horrified by the invasion, immediately switched sides. All their weather stations stopped sending data to occupied Norway and started cooperating exclusively with the Allies.
Ah. So Germany was suddenly blind, meteorologically speaking.
Essentially, yeah. Cut off from the source of their long-range forecasts.
So desperate for substitutes, the Nazi high command turned to the Kriegsmarine, specifically Admiral Karl Dönitz, head of the U-boat fleet. He controlled their main assets in the Atlantic.
And Dönitz was, well, furious is probably the right word. Our sources really detail his strong objections. For a time, between about August 1940 and January 1941, some U-boats were assigned full-time weather reporting duties.
Just sitting there taking readings.
Pretty much. And Dönitz viewed this as, quote, pedestrian. His mission was sinking ships. Every U-boat acting as a floating barometer was one less wolfpack hunter.
And it wasn't just philosophy, right? He had resource issues.
Huge resource issues.
Yeah.
At the start of the war, his fleet was tiny. Only 57 U-boats total and just 27 of the long-range Type Ds.
Those were the ones that could really operate deep in the Atlantic.
Exactly. The true ocean-going boats. The smaller coastal ones couldn't handle those deep Arctic patrols needed for weather recon.
So taking 6, maybe more of those precious Type EIs off the front line?
For him, it was crippling. Fewer wolf packs, less pressure on Britain. Now that full-time commitment ended relatively quickly, but Dönitz was still stuck. U-boats kept having to ferry personnel, supplies, equipment to these remote land stations they started trying to set up.
He was reluctantly servicing the weather war.
You could say that. He wasn't happy about it.
Okay, so if the U-boats were too valuable, what about the Luftwaffe? Surely they could fly reconnaissance missions.
They tried. They definitely tried. They set up Wetterkundungsstaffel 5, Weather Squadron 5, Wakusta 5 for short, operating out of airfields in Norway, like Trondheim and Banak.
Flying over the high Arctic, that sounds incredibly challenging.
Twice daily flights, if they could manage it. Using converted bombers and transports, Heinkel 111s, Ju-88s, the old reliable Ju-52s, they even had distinctive nose art, apparently. A flying frog.
A flying frog. Okay, little bit of character in that bleak landscape. But the hazards must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely immense. These aircraft face conditions you can barely imagine. Extreme cold stressing the airframes, engines constantly sputtering.
Icing must have been a nightmare.
A constant deadly threat. Severe icing could pull a plane right out of the sky. And navigation, a nightmare. You're flying over this featureless white expanse, ice and water. You lose all visual reference.
So they're relying on
Radio direction finding, sextants. But even those methods were unreliable because of the magnetic variation near the pole. And just keeping the radios working in those conditions, dealing with static blackouts, just to send back barometric pressure readings.
It sounds incredibly difficult.
It was. And here's the killer irony, the thing that ultimately doomed the air reconnaissance idea. The Wakusta missions were constantly being canceled.
Let me guess. Because of bad weather.
Exactly. The very thing they were trying to predict often kept their planes on the ground. So inherently unreliable, hugely expensive in fuel and aircraft wear, it just wasn't a sustainable solution.
Okay, so U-boats are too valuable, air missions are unreliable. Hitler's high command needed another plan. They desperately needed that North Atlantic data, so they turned to disguised surface ships, weather trawlers.
Right, which brings us to part 2. And this seemingly clever idea turns into what sources call an unmitigated disaster.
Why disaster? The idea seems sound enough on the surface. Disguise them as fishing boats.
The thinking was they could sneak into position, collect data, transmit it, and nobody would notice. Simple fishing trawlers.
Yeah.
But it was, honestly, one of the single greatest strategic failures for Germany in the entire war.
Because the British weren't fooled for a second.
Not even close. British intelligence, particularly the code breakers at Bletchley Park, and the Royal Navy's radio direction finding. They were monitoring everything. The Germans were transmitting frequently, maybe thinking weather data wasn't that sensitive.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake. The element of surprise was zero. These trawlers were spotted, tracked, and hunted down relentlessly by the Royal Navy, captured or sunk one after another.
Now here's a question. Why would the Royal Navy commit serious resources destroyers, cruisers, to chase down these little fishing trawlers? Sinking them seems like small beer compared to hunting U-boats.
But it wasn't about the ships themselves, or even primarily about denying the weather data, though that helped. It was about what was inside those ships.
Okay.
This is where the weather war ties directly, critically, into the code-breaking war. Every single one of these weather trawlers carried an Enigma cipher machine.
Oh, of course, along with all the operational bits and pieces.
Exactly. Code books, rotor settings, everything needed to operate it. The Germans just didn't grasp that the act of transmitting anything exposed the ships to location finding. They thought, it's just weather data, who cares?
But the British cared. A lot.
This is the crucial strategic point. Why the trawler program became, as some historians argue, a major contributor to Germany's defeat. The Royal Navy's pursuit wasn't just about sinking trawlers, it was a targeted intelligence harvesting operation.
A gold mine for Bletchley Park.
An absolute gold mine. Every capture potentially delivered fresh cryptographic materials, rotors, settings, codebooks, absolutely vital for breaking and keeping pace with changes in the German Enigma codes. Think about ships like the Lauenburg. Its capture provided keys right when the Germans were tightening security.
Didn't some of these trawlers have the newer Enigma machines?
Yes. Critically, several were among the first units equipped with the 4-rotor Enigma, the M4 Shark cipher, which was specifically designed for U-boat communications.
So capturing M4 rotors and the associated paperwork?
Like the special weather cipher book, the Kengruppen book, that was a game changer. It allowed the Allies to read U-boat traffic for extended, critical periods during the Battle of the Atlantic. Huge impact.
It's just staggering, the lack of imagination on the German side. They saw the trawlers were vulnerable.
Right, they realized they were getting sunk too easily, so they stopped using them. But they never connected the dots. They never realized the weather missions themselves were compromising their most secret communications.
They thought the problem was the ship, not the radio inside it.
Exactly. And this catastrophic failure just hammered home the point.
Mm-hmm.
They needed permanent, fixed, land-based stations. Much harder to find, much harder to take out once established.
So having learned that lesson the hard way, Germany turns its eyes to somewhere even more remote, a place they hoped they could operate unnoticed. Jan Mayen Island. Part 3 focuses on this desolate, strategic rock.
Jan Mayen is, well, Barron is putting it mildly, just 34 miles long, dominated by that huge volcano, Beerenberg, over 7,000 feet high. No resources, no people.
But perfectly positioned.
Smack bang in the path of those Atlantic weather systems, ideal for a reporting station.
Now, before the invasion of Norway in 1940, there were Norwegians there, right? Meteorologists.
4 of them. And after the invasion, they immediately stopped sending data to the mainland. They contacted the British, basically saying, we expect the Germans will try to take this place.
Smart move. How did the British respond?
They sent a free Norwegian gunboat, the Fridtjof Nansen, with 68 men to set up a garrison. But the initial effort was a complete disaster.
What happened?
October 1940. The gunboat ran aground on one of Jan Mayen's submerged reefs. Total loss. Suddenly you've got 68 guys marooned on a volcanic rock as winter descends.
Oh, wow. Imagine that isolation. Constant darkness coming, storms.
They decided they had to abandon the island temporarily, wait for spring. And the survival story here is incredible. Our sources mention to supplement rations, they had to shoot polar bears.
Polar bears.
Yeah, apparently the bears prowled the coast hunting seals, so the garrison hunted the hunters, an extraordinary image of survival.
And getting them off the island.
Extremely difficult. Rough seas, huge waves crashing on that jagged lava coast. Took 10 separate trips in small boats just to shuttle everyone to the rescue ship. And before leaving, the meteorologists meticulously destroyed all their radio gear, left nothing for the Germans.
But that silence from Jan Mayen, that must have been a huge red flag for the Germans.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Air reconnaissance confirmed the station was abandoned. Now, conventional wisdom said launching an expedition that close to winter was madness.
But the data was too valuable.
Exactly. The need for weather data overruled caution. They put together a complex team, typical Nazi multi-service operation. Sonderkommando Graf Finkenstein.
Led by an actual count.
Count Ulrich von Finkenstein, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mix of Luftwaffe weather guys, Abwehr radio specialists, even a Norwegian collaborator. They sailed on a fishing trawler, the Henrik Fries, November 12, 1940, racing the weather.
But the British were watching. They'd codenamed Jan Mayen Island X.
They knew its value, and despite the terrible weather, they kept up patrols. Their vigilance paid off spectacularly. Just 4 days later, November 16th, the light cruiser HMS Naiad intercepted the Henrik Fries before it even reached the island.
Caught them red-handed.
The trawler made a desperate dash for the coast. Now, there's a bit of confusion in the accounts here. Some say the skipper just messed up navigating the rocks under pressure.
Plausible.
But most accounts suggest it was deliberate. They intentionally wrecked the ship on the lava rocks.
Why? To avoid capture.
To prevent the British from capturing the equipment, and, crucially again, the Enigma materials on board. Scuttling protocols.
So the ship hits the rocks.
Smashes up. Heavy surf swamps the lifeboats immediately. Survivors are thrown into the freezing Arctic water. 2 men drowned, tragically. The rest managed to scramble ashore.
Only to find
A British landing party waiting for them. The entire German expedition captured, basically days after leaving port. A complete Allied success.
Wow. So the Allies moved back in.
Wasted no time. Reoccupied in March in 1941, built a proper garrison. But the Germans didn't give up harassing it. They sent long-range Focke-Wulf Condors on bombing raids.
Those big 4-engine planes. Dangerous missions, I bet.
Extraordinarily dangerous. August 7th, 1941, one of those Condors, flying low in thick fog, completely misjudged its position. Flew straight into a mountainside.
Oh, no.
Killed all 9 crew instantly, and pieces of that wreckage are supposedly still there today, scattered on that remote mountainside, a frozen monument to this hidden war.
Okay, let's shift focus now further northeast to the Svalbard archipelago, specifically Spitsbergen. If Jan Mayen was important, Spitsbergen sounds like it was even more critical. Dual significance, you said.
That's right. Spitsbergen wasn't just perfectly located for weather gathering, it also had valuable coal deposits, active mines, operated by both Norwegians and Russians.
Ah, so it had resource value and strategic location value, affecting the Battle of the Atlantic and the Arctic convoys to Russia.
Precisely, which is why, in August 1941, Winston Churchill greenlit a pretty bold preemptive strike, Operation Gauntlet.
A commando raid.
Textbook stuff. Canadian troops, supported by the Royal Navy's Force K cruisers, HMS Nigeria and Aurora. A powerful force. The mission had two main goals.
Evacuation and demolition.
Spot on. First, evacuate the civilians.
Yeah.
Massive job, nearly 2,000 Russians, over 700 Norwegians. Second, systematically destroy everything of value to the Germans. The mines, the machinery, all the fuel stocks. Deny them the resources and the facilities.
And I remember reading about the deception involved here. That was quite clever.
Yeah, really neat. To keep the Germans in the dark until the last possible second. The radio stations on Spitsbergen kept broadcasting normally. They even sent out false weather reports.
What kind of reports?
Reports of persistent, dense fog. Kept that up right until the demolition charges were blown and the stations themselves were destroyed. Highly successful mission. Left a strategic vacuum.
Which the Germans immediately tried to fill.
Of course. October 41, they landed a small 10-man Luftwaffe meteorological team in the northeast part of Spitsbergen. These guys were dedicated. They carved out a basic landing strip, set up proper stations like Banso and Nosby, started sending back high-value data.
The Allies weren't going to let that stand, surely.
No way. Once the winter passed, they launched a counterattack in May 1942. The plan was to use free Norwegian ski troops, about 80 of them, to go in and root out the German weather teams.
Sounds like a good plan. Mountain troops for mountain warfare.
On paper, yes.
Yeah.
In execution, a disaster. Their transport ships, the Isbjorn and Celis, were jumped almost immediately by German FW-200 Condors.
Those Condors again?
Both ships hit hard, badly damaged, sunk. 14 Norwegians killed right off the bat.
Terrible. What happened to the survivors?
They ended up in the freezing Arctic water. Managed to scramble ashore, but their expedition was basically over before it began. Our sources paint a grim picture. They salvaged just 15 pairs of skis, a few rifles, and one broken lamp. That's it.
Stranded and practically unarmed. How did they even get rescued?
Pure luck, really. They managed to flag down a passing British Catalina flying boat, which reported the absolute shambles of their mission.
So the German stations survived that attempt.
They did, for a while.
Yeah.
Eventually, though, supplying and defending these manned stations became too difficult. They were often shut down, the personnel evacuated by U-boat. Although the Germans did leave behind an automated weather station that kept transmitting through the summer of '42.
Automated stations. We'll come back to those later, I think.
Definitely. But the main German presence faded. The Allies did reestablish their own permanent garrison.
But the story of Spitsbergen isn't quite over, is it? There's Operation Zitronella, September 1943.
Ah, yes, Zitronella. This one is interesting. By September 43, the war is turning decisively against Germany. They just suffered the massive defeat at Kursk. Things are looking grim.
So why launch a major naval operation against Spitsbergen? Seems disproportionate.
That's the key question for analysis, isn't it? Why risk assets like the battleship Tirpitz? This operation involved Tirpitz, the battlecruiser Scharnhorst, 9 destroyers, plus a battalion of soldiers.
That's immense firepower.
It's what's called a fleet in being. Just the existence of Tirpitz tied up huge Allied naval resources trying to contain her. Risking her on a raid like this, it feels more like a political statement, a show of force, than a sound military decision.
Especially against, what, a tiny Norwegian garrison?
Exactly. About 100 Norwegians, so you have Germany's mightiest available warships pounding this small outpost. They leveled buildings, killed 9 defenders, captured about 40. It was, incidentally, the only time Tirpitz ever fired her main guns in anger at an enemy shore target.
Quite a footnote for such a famous ship.
But the execution, well, wasn't exactly smooth. The sources mentioned this almost comical detail about the poor fire coordination.
Don't tell me.
Yes. The mighty Tirpitz lobbing these enormous 15-inch shells. Apparently, some landed dangerously close to their own landing parties ashore.
You couldn't make it up. A complete fiasco of coordination.
It really highlights the difficulties of operating in those remote Arctic conditions. Anyway, despite flattening the place temporarily, the German fleet didn't stick around. They knew the position was too exposed, totally untenable if the Allies decided to hit back hard.
So they pulled out.
Pulled out quickly. The Allies promptly returned, rebuilt, and reoccupied. Germany never tried another major surface action there. Tirpitz was risked for essentially zero strategic gain.
Okay, our journey now heads west, across the Atlantic, to the world's largest island, Greenland. Vast, desolate, and the setting for some really unexpected small-scale military drama.
Greenland, yeah, a Danish colony. But when Denmark was occupied in 1940, it created this instant governance crisis. The Danish governor there, Eske Brun, made a very shrewd decision.
It was.
He basically figured any orders coming from occupied Copenhagen were really coming from the Nazis. So he unilaterally declared Greenland independent for the duration of the war, cut ties with the occupied government.
That's a bold move. Did it get Washington's attention?
Immediately. The Danish ambassador in the U.S., Henrik de Kaufmann, met with FDR. And the U.S., even though still officially neutral, invoked the Monroe Doctrine. Basically said, no German foothold in the Western Hemisphere.
So Greenland became a U.S. protectorate.
Effectively, yes. The U.S. sent the Greenland Patrol, commanded by Edward Iceberg Smith, great nickname. Their mission, defend Greenland, specifically prevent German weather stations being set up in the Northeast.
But that coastline, it's immense, 1,600 miles, mostly uninhabited. How do you patrol that?
That job fell to this really incredible, unique group, the Northeast Greenland Sledge Patrol.
These weren't regular soldiers, were they?
Not at all. Civilian patrol, about 15 guys, Eskimos, Danes, Norwegians. Many were solitary hunters, trappers, people who knew the land intimately. They patrolled about 500 miles of coastline by dog sledge, based out of a place called Eskimo.
Dog sledges against potential German incursions? Amazing. Did they find anything?
Their first big success was September 1941. They reported seeing strangers. This led the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Northland to investigate. They found a Norwegian trawler, the Busko, acting suspiciously.
A supply ship for a landing party.
Exactly. The Northland tracked the landing party to this isolated hunter's shack. Lieutenant Leroy McCluskey led a small shore party, surrounded the shack. Surprised 3 Germans inside, no resistance. Apparently, the Germans actually seemed relieved. They immediately offered McCluskey coffee, started a fire to heat water.
Very civilized. Or was it?
McCluskey was sharp. He realized it wasn't just hospitality. They were using the fire to try and burn their code book and other sensitive documents before the Americans could grab them.
Ah, the old coffee trick. Did he stop them?
Rushed the fire, rescued the code book just in time, according to the reports. Another huge intelligence win, stemming from this tiny patrol.
Now, hang on. September 41, that's before Pearl Harbor. The U.S. is neutral.
Exactly. Which led to this weird legal situation. The captured Germans couldn't technically be POWs. So officially, they were taken into custody as illegal immigrants.
Illegal immigrants captured by the Coast Guard. Okay.
Paperwork aside, it's often cited as the U.S. Navy's first capture of enemy personnel in World War II.
Fascinating technicality. Did the Germans try again in Greenland?
They did. 2 years later, 1943, a mission codenamed Hulsage, led by an Austrian lieutenant, Hermann Ritter. Sources suggest Ritter wasn't exactly an enthusiastic Nazi, but he led the mission. They set up a station on Sabine Island, near the Sledge Patrol's base at Eskimo.
How were they discovered this time?
Again, the Sledge Patrol. Patroller Marius Jensen, out with 2 Eskimo guides, found tracks in the snow. Tracks from heeled boots, definitely not local footwear. Then they found a discarded jacket with a swastika patch.
Game over.
The discovery was made. But it created a serious legal problem for Governor Brun.
How?
He realized these patrollers were civilians, hunters, trappers. If the Germans captured them, under the rules of war as interpreted then, they'd likely be shot as partisans or bandits, not treated as POWs. They weren't uniformed members of a regular army.
Right. That's a critical distinction under the Geneva Conventions. So what did Brun do?
This is amazing. To protect his men, give them legal combatant status if captured, Governor Brun formally constituted the 15 patrollers as the Greenland Army.
The Greenland Army. 15 guys on dog sleds.
Became the smallest official, legally recognized army of the Second Great War, just so they'd hopefully be treated as POWs if caught.
Did it work? I mean, did it prevent violence?
Sadly, no. The legal status didn't stop the Germans from launching a surprise raid on Eskimo Ness. They burned the base to the ground. And tragically, patroller Eli Knudsen was killed, machine gun in the attack.
But the patrol fought back.
They did. Incredibly, Marius Jensen, the guy who first found the tracks, later managed to track Lieutenant Ritter alone, turned the tables, captured the German officer single-handedly, marched him 300 miles south to turn him over to the Americans. Meanwhile, U.S. bombers found the German station on Sabine Island and bombed it into rubble. The Greenland Weather War, fought by Sledge Patrol and Coast Guard cutters, was effectively over. So by 1944, the war is clearly heading towards an Allied victory. But for Germany, clinging on, weather data was still vital, especially for defending the Reich itself. So these furtive Arctic operations actually continued right into the endgame, which is our Part 6.
And the U.S. Coast Guard was getting better equipped for this fight, too.
Definitely. They had new, proper ice-breaking cutters operating. The USS Eastwind was on patrol, responded to reports of suspicious activity on Little Coldaway Island off Greenland's coast.
Another German weather team.
Yep, the 12-man Goldschmidt team. The Eastwind managed to surprise and capture the entire party without a single shot being fired. Very efficient.
But the mission wasn't over, was it? There's a ship involved here, too.
All right, and this is a really fascinating little piece of naval history. After capturing the shore party, the Eastwind then captured the Goldschmidt team's supply ship, a German trawler named the Externstein.
And the significance of the Externstein?
It holds the unique distinction of being the only German surface warship captured at sea by United States forces during the entire Second Great War.
The only one. Captured by the Coast Guard as part of a weather intelligence operation. That's incredible.
It really is. Shows how intertwined these different facets of the war were.
Despite these losses, the Germans still managed one last, almost lavish weather station effort, didn't they? Hortigen.
Weather Station Hortigen, yeah.
Yeah.
Deep in Spitsbergen again. This one sounds almost comfortable compared to the others. A cluster of well-stocked huts, a 7-bunk dormitory, even a small library, 20 volumes apparently.
A library in an Arctic weather station, okay?
Yeah.
What happened to them?
Well, the personnel there heard the news of Germany's official surrender on May 7th, 1945.
So they packed up.
Nope. Here's where the timeline goes completely off the rails. They didn't surrender, they just kept broadcasting weather data. But now, knowing the war was over, they sent it in plain, uncoded text.
Just kept doing their job. Were they forgotten?
Seemingly forgotten by headquarters, who obviously had bigger fish to fry in May 1945. These guys just carried on through the entire summer. Until September 4th, 1945. 4 months after VE Day. They finally surrendered to the captain of a passing Norwegian seal hunting vessel.
September 4th, that makes them.
The very last German military unit to officially capitulate in the Second Great War. Surrendered to his seal hunter. A bizarre end to the weather war.
Absolutely bizarre. But there's one more strange postscript, isn't there? Decades later in Canada.
Ah, yes, the curious case of Weather Station Kurt. This wasn't discovered until the 1980s, but it was deployed way back in October 1943.
An automated station.
An automated one, yes. Designated WFL Num 26, set up by Dr. Kurt Sommermeyer and his assistant. They were dropped off by U-boat, U-537, deep inside Martin Bay, northern Labrador.
Labrador. So, on the North American mainland.
Yes. And they went to extraordinary lengths to disguise it.
How so?
The station itself was clearly marked with a fake label, Canadian Weather Service. And apparently, they scattered American cigarette butts around the site.
To make it look like an Allied installation if found. Clever deception.
Very clever, but ultimately pointless in this case. The station failed after only a few days. Probably the batteries died in the extreme cold, and then it was just forgotten. Completely lost to history.
Until the 1980s, how was it found?
A researcher, going through Dr. Sommermeyer's surviving papers after his death, found the documentation, found the clues needed to figure out where it might be.
And they actually found it.
Found it and recovered it in 1981. Mast, canisters, the whole thing. An incredible find. It's now on display at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. A tangible piece of this secret weather war discovered 4 decades late.
So, when we pull all these threads together, these isolated frozen battles fought by tiny teams of meteorologists, hunters, sailors, what does it all really mean? These weren't just footnotes, were they?
No, not at all. You have to see this secret war as almost the central nervous system, maybe a highly pressurized one, of the larger global conflict.
Because that seemingly simple need, a reliable 72-hour forecast, was driving huge strategic decisions?
Absolutely. It dictated naval movements, air operations, even major land campaigns. It influenced when Dönitz felt he could risk his U-boats out in the Atlantic Gap. And conversely, it was critical for the Allies timing huge operations, like the D-Day landings. That forecast was paramount.
And the unintended consequences, they're just astonishing when you look back.
Completely. That desperate push for real-time weather data led directly, if accidentally, to the catastrophic compromise of Enigma, Germany's most vital secret, all because of those vulnerable weather trawlers transmitting.
And in Greenland, that threat led to the creation of maybe the most unique military unit of the war.
The smallest official army, 15 civilian hunters, formally militarized, just to give them legal protection under the laws of war, all driven by the need to secure or deny weather data. It's incredible.
It really highlights how critical, how fragile, and how incredibly dangerous this intelligence war over simple air pressure readings became. Just this constant cycle of adaptation, desperation, hiding in the Arctic cold.
Which does raise a really important question for you, the listener, to think about today. If weather intelligence was that decisive, even with the pretty rudimentary technology of the 1940s.
Right, 72 hours was the gold standard then.
And losing access to that data could compromise a nation's biggest secrets. Well, how reliant are modern militaries on predictive technologies now? Think about the stuff we don't even see: high-res satellite data, complex AI-driven atmospheric modeling.
Giving forecasts weeks out with incredible precision.
Exactly. So what happens if a nation suddenly loses access to that kind of critical predictive data today? What kind of strategic blindness would that create? And what would the next secret weather war look like in the 21st century?
A truly fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling thought to leave things on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.